Wyoming Territory, July 1879. The sun was just cresting the distant Absaroka Range when Gideon Nash reined in his bay, gelding at the edge of the broken bridge that spanned a dry gulch off the Snake River Trail. His horse snorted, ears twitching. Something was off. Gideon scanned the area, eyes narrowing beneath the brim of his sweat-darkened hat. A scrap of blue fabric caught his eye. He dismounted fast, boots crunching on dry dirt as he approached the twisted beams of the collapsed bridge. Just past the edge, half hidden by sagebrush and dust, lay a woman unmoving, one arm tucked beneath her, the other scraped and bleeding. "Ma'am." His voice was rough from dust and disuse, but it carried. She stirred faintly, lips cracked, eyelids fluttering. "Water." He dropped to his knees beside her, tugged the canteen from his belt, and lifted her gently. Her body was light, too light, like she had not eaten in days. She drank in small, careful sips, some of the water spilling down her chin. He steadied her, one hand at her back, the other holding the canteen. Her skin was fever-warm. "I've got you," he said quietly. More to himself than her clothes were torn at the shoulder, her boots scuffed and worn through at the soles. A streak of dried blood ran from her temple into her hairline. She looked like she had fallen hard or run far. "What happened?" he asked. She blinked slow, the words barely reaching him. "I was trying to get away from them." Gideon's jaw tightened. "Them who?" But her eyes fluttered shut, and she slumped forward against his chest. He shifted her into his arms, rising carefully. "All right, we'll talk later." He carried her to his horse, secured her in the saddle in front of him, and rode hard for the ranch. The cabin squatted low against the hill, weathered pine walls and a wide porch shaded by a cottonwood. Gideon kicked the door open and carried her inside, laying her gently on the cot by the hearth. He lit the lamp, checked her wounds, and cleaned the worst of the blood away. Her name was not on her. No letter, no papers, just a bundle slung across her shoulder, half buried in the gulch. He had grabbed it on the way out. Inside was a single photograph, worn at the corners, her with two children, a boy and a girl. Both looked under 10. She was smiling. The kids did not smile. Gideon sat back on his heels. "Where are they?" he muttered. She woke later that night, gasping softly. He was there, sitting on the floor beside the cot, back against the wall. She turned her head, eyes wide with confusion. "You are safe," he said gently. "You fell near the bridge. I brought you here." She looked around, then down at the blanket covering her. Her voice was hoarse. "You live alone," he nodded. "Just me." She winced, trying to sit up. He moved to help her, but she flinched. "I am not going to hurt you," he said, pulling his hands back. She looked away, breathing hard. "I am Gideon Nash." He waited, then asked, "What is your name?" After a pause, she whispered, Delia Thorne." He nodded once. "Good to meet you, Delia." She shut her eyes again, but not before he saw the tears gathering there. By morning, her fever had gone down. She ate slowly, soup and bread, her hands shaking with each bite. She would not say much, but when he asked about the children in the photo, her eyes lit up with panic. "They are mine," she said, voice raw. "Lily and Luke. I left them at a church in Cody. I had to. They were chasing me. I needed them safe." "Who was chasing you?" She looked down at her lap. "My husband's brothers. He died in the spring. They wanted the land, his money, said I did not deserve any of it, said I was just some orphan girl he dragged out of a convent." Her voice broke. "I tried to fight, but I could not keep them safe." Gideon leaned forward. "You did what you had to. You got them away." She nodded slowly, tears streaking her cheeks. He swallowed hard. "We will get them back." Her head snapped up. "What?" I said. "We'll go to Cody. Get your kids. Bring them here. You are not alone anymore." She stared at him like she was not sure if he was real. Then she whispered, "Why?" He stood, jaw tight. "Because I know what it is to lose someone and live half a life after, and because no one should fight alone." By the third day, Delia could walk short distances. Gideon saddled the wagon and hitched his mule. She sat beside him, bundled in one of his coats. The road to Cody was rough, but he kept the pace steady. As they rode, Delia opened up in pieces. Her husband was a schoolteacher, kind-hearted. He had died of fever that winter. His brothers had shown up 2 weeks later, claiming the house and land. She had refused. They burned the barn, threatened the children. She took what she could and ran. "I did not know where else to go," she said, voice soft. "I just kept walking." "You did right," Gideon said. "You got them out." Delia looked over at him, eyes searching. "What about you?" "Why are you out here alone?" He hesitated, then said, "I lost someone too, my wife. 6 years ago, she died giving birth, lost the baby too. After that, I left the town, the noise, just stayed out here, figured I was not meant for more." Delia looked down, voice quiet. "I am sorry," he shrugged. "You do not need to be, but maybe I was wrong." She met his eyes. Something passed between them, then quiet understanding, shared ache. They found Lily and Luke at the church, just as Delia had said. The preacher's wife wept when she saw Delia clutching her hands. "They are good kids," she said. "Brave, they missed you something fierce." Delia knelt as the children came out from behind the altar. Lily ran first, thin arms flung around her mother's neck. Luke followed slower, eyes wary, but when Delia pulled him into her arms, he clung tight. Gideon stood back, watching the reunion with a lump in his throat. Later, as they rode back, Lily sat beside her mother and Luke curled against Gideon's side. The boy looked up at him. "Are you going to live with us?" Gideon blinked. "Well, I am not sure yet." Luke thought on that. "I think you should." Delia looked over at him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. She did not speak, but the warmth in her eyes said more than words. And for the first time in 6 years, Gideon Nash felt something inside him begin to mend. The wind came in low off the hills, carrying the sweet scent of drying grass and pine pitch. Gideon held the reins loose as the wagon bumped along the rutted trail toward the homestead. Delia sat beside him, one hand resting protectively on the seat behind her children. Lily was asleep against her mother's side, while Luke watched the world pass with quiet eyes, thumb tucked under his chin. The sun dipped lower, casting long gold shadows across the land. Gideon shifted slightly, then said, "There's a lean-to behind the barn. Needs fixing, but if you want a space of your own for a while, it could work." Delia looked at him, uncertain. "You mean for me and the children?" He nodded. "I can string fresh canvas, patch what's needed, just until you figure what you want." Her eyes went back to the road. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not." He kept his gaze forward. She didn't answer, but after a moment her hand drifted down to her daughter's hair, stroking gently. When they reached the cabin, the light had faded into dusk. Gideon lifted Lily first, careful not to wake her, then helped Luke down. Delia followed, one hand steadying herself on the wagon rail. He led them to the door, then paused. "There's not much room inside. I can sleep in the barn till the lean-to's solid." Delia turned toward him. "You don't have to do that." He met her eyes. "I know." She nodded once, then pushed the door open. Inside, the cot had been made up with clean linens. Gideon had swept out the corners that morning, and the hearth still held the warmth of the fire he'd banked before they left. Luke crossed to the far wall, where a worn wooden horse sat among a few small items Gideon had kept from his past. He picked it up, turning it in his hands. "That was mine," Gideon said quietly. "My father carved it when I was 6. Luke looked up. "Can I hold on to it for a while? It's yours now." Delia's gaze lingered on him for a beat, and something soft flickered across her face, but she said nothing. Later, after the children were settled and the fire had burned low, Gideon stepped outside. He stood on the porch, watching the stars push through the velvet dark. The door creaked open behind him. Delia stepped out, shawl drawn tight. "They're asleep," he nodded. "I didn't think I'd ever see their faces again." "You don't have to say anything," he said. "You already did everything that mattered." She stepped closer to the railing. "When I was with their father, I always thought we'd grow old in that house. It wasn't much, but it had a garden. He built me a bench under the cottonwoods. I used to read there." Gideon listened in silence. "The night I left, I had to choose between the deed and my children. I grabbed what I could and ran." "You chose right," he said. She looked over at him. "You live quiet, but you don't seem like a man who's hiding." "I'm not, just tired of noise that doesn't mean anything." She nodded slowly. "It's peaceful here. I built it to be." She looked out across the land, her voice quieter. "I don't know what comes next. You don't have to, not tonight." She smiled faintly, then turned toward the door. Her hand lingered on the frame. "Thank you for letting us stay." "You're not just staying," he said. "You belong here as much as I do." Her eyes met his, and for the first time since they'd met, she held his gaze without flinching. He watched her disappear into the cabin, the door shutting softly behind her. He stayed on the porch long after, listening to the night settle over the land. He didn't know what shape their future would take, but for the first time in years he felt the ground beneath him hold steady, and that was enough. For now. The sound of hammering echoed through the pine grove as Gideon braced another plank against the lean-to's frame. His shirt clung to his back in the heat, sawdust clinging to the sweat on his arms. He glanced up as Delia approached, a basin of water in her hands, her sleeves rolled to the elbow, a strip of linen tied around her wrist where a splinter had caught her that morning. "I told Luke not to climb the fence," she said, setting down the basin near a stump, "but he says he's testing how strong you built it." Gideon wiped his brow with the back of his hand. "That boy's got ideas. He'll be running this place before I've finished mending it." Delia smiled faintly, but her gaze drifted past him, toward the field where Lily was gathering wildflowers into her apron. "She's quieter than she used to be, watches everything now. She'll find her place again," Gideon said. "They both will." Delia knelt beside the basin and dipped a cloth, wringing it slow. "I used to think a place was just a roof and a fence, something you claimed with a deed, but it's more than that, isn't it?" He set his hammer down. "It's the land under your nails, the quiet you wake to. Who stays when the wind changes." She looked up at him. "This place, it's yours, you made it." "I built it," he said, "but I've never shared it, not really." Delia's eyes held his for a long moment. "Then maybe we both have to learn how." That evening, the children fell asleep early, worn out from chasing grasshoppers and arguing over who got the last biscuit. Gideon sat on the porch rail, boot heel hooked on the post. Delia came out with a folded patchwork quilt and sat on the step below him. He watched as she pulled the needle through a tear in the corner square. "You sew when the world's writing itself." She didn't look up. "I sew when I'm thinking, when words feel too heavy for my mouth." Gideon tilted his head. "What are you thinking now?" "That maybe I don't know what a future looks like anymore," she said. "But I know it shouldn't be borrowed or begged for." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You don't owe me anything, Delia, not for the roof, not for the meals. You and the kids, none of this is charity." She stitched another length in silence, then said, "When my husband died, I stopped believing kindness could come without cost." Gideon didn't answer right away. The sky stretched wide above them, stars sharp against the dark. The only sound was the breath of the wind through the cottonwoods. "I'm not looking to be owed," he said. "I'm just trying to live honest." Her fingers slowed. "And if I don't know how to trust that yet, then I'll wait," he said. "But I'll keep showing you." She looked over her shoulder, eyes unreadable in the dim light. "You don't even know what you're waiting for." He met her gaze. "I think I do." She turned back to her stitching, but her shoulders eased, the tension softened. "After a while," she said, "Luke asked if we'd plant corn next spring. I told him we'd see." Gideon's voice was low. "We'll need to till the lower field, soil there's good." "You don't mind that he's already planning seasons ahead," he chuckled softly. "Planning's not the same as expecting." "And no, I don't mind." Delia folded the quilt once more and stood. "I never wanted to need anyone." "You don't," he said, "but you're allowed to want." She lingered at the door, hand on the frame. "I'm not ready to name anything yet." "I'm not asking you to," he said. "Just stay." She nodded once, slow and sure, and went inside. Gideon remained on the porch, listening to the quiet stir of the house behind him. There was no miracle in what was growing between them, no sudden flame. Just a steady warmth, a place being made by hand and heart, stitch by stitch. And for the first time, he wasn't waiting to be alone again. He was building something that could hold. The first frost came early that year. It cracked the edges of the troughs before sunrise and left a brittle sheen on the cabin window panes. Gideon rose before the children stirred, pulling on his coat and stepping outside to split wood. His breath fogged in the air as the axe struck the round, clean and steady. Delia joined him not long after, her boots crunching over the hardened earth. She carried a small bundle under one arm, mended shirts folded neat, and a wool cap she eased onto Luke's head when he followed her out moments later. Gideon glanced up. "He'll be too warm once the sun's up," Delia shrugged. "He's proud of it. Says it makes him look like a trapper." Luke puffed his chest and nodded solemnly. "I'm hunting rabbits today." Gideon set the axe down. "You find any, you bring them to me first. I'll show you how to dress them right." Luke gave a sharp nod and trudged off toward the tree line, his wooden horse tucked into his belt like a charm. Delia stayed behind, arms crossed against the cold. "He's been talking in his sleep," she said. Sometimes he mumbles about the barn fire. About hiding, Gideon peeled his gloves off. You want me to talk to him? He won't say a word about it when he's awake, just gets quiet if I ask. Then let him come to it in his own time. She nodded slowly, then looked toward the slope beyond the corral. I started clearing the thistle patch near the east fence, found a few squash vines under it, wild ones maybe. I can turn the soil there better in spring. It'll hold water longer. Delia's voice was low. I'd like to put beans in too. My mother used to grow them on a trellis. Said they needed something to lean on, but once they caught hold, they'd climb without looking back. Gideon didn't answer right away. He watched the sun begin to melt the frost off the fence rails. You ever think about staying past winter? She looked down at her hands. I think about what a home could be if I let it. Gideon stepped closer, his voice quiet. You don't have to name it, but I'd make room for whatever you needed. Her eyes lifted to his, steady now. I'd need honesty. And a place where I could speak without being silenced. You'd have both, he said. Delia drew in a breath, then let it out slow. And I'd need to work for it, not be handed something like it was owed. I wouldn't offer what I didn't mean to share, he said. And I don't expect anything back but truth. She held his gaze, then nodded once. Then maybe I could try. They stood in silence, the early light stretching gold across the field. Later that day, Gideon hitched the plow and took Luke with him to the south rise, pointing out the rocks that needed pulling, the places where roots would catch. Lily followed Delia through the tall grass behind the cabin with a basket, learning how to tell shepherd's purse from poisoned parsnip. That night, after the children had settled and the fire burned low, Delia stood by the hearth, her arms wrapped around herself. Gideon rose from the table, crossing the room without hurry. I kept thinking it would feel like waiting for the other shoe to drop, she said. Like something would break if I let myself breathe. He didn't touch her, just waited, but the quiet here. She said, it's not empty, it holds. He reached out then, one hand brushing hers. She turned it over, lacing her fingers through his like she'd done it before. I'm not running anymore, she said. Gideon's voice was hushed. Then stay, not just through winter. She leaned into him, her forehead resting against his chest. I think I already have. Outside, the wind shifted through the trees, soft as a lullaby. Inside, the silence wrapped around them, not hollow but full, built from shared days, from steady hands and slow-growing trust. And in that quiet, something whole was made. Not quickly, not easily, but fully. Like the land itself had decided they belonged. By mid-November, the ground had hardened enough to hold the weight of a loaded wagon without sinking, and the last of the autumn wind had stripped the cottonwoods bare. The days came short and gray, and the nights drew long, stitched with the hush of snow waiting to fall. Gideon struck flint to kindling early that morning, coaxing flame from damp bark. Delia stood at the table, slicing dried apples into a pot. Lily sat nearby, threading cranberries onto twine with a needle, her brow pinched in concentration. Luke was at Gideon's side, watching the fire take hold like it might tell him something. Delia turned slightly. We'll need to salt the last of the venison before the freeze deepens. I'll bring it up from the root cellar, Gideon said, brushing ash from his hands. There's still some of last winter's salt left in the sack near the cider barrel. Delia nodded, reaching for the clay jar of cloves. Lily, you can help grind these, just enough to steep with the cider. Lily looked up. With the mortar, Delia passed it to her. Slow and steady. Luke wandered over to the window and pressed his hand to the glass. There's a wagon coming. Gideon moved to the door and stepped out just as the wagon crested the slope. A single mule pulled it, and a man sat hunched beneath a patched coat. As he drew closer, Gideon recognized him, Joseph Everly, the circuit clerk from Fort Washakie. He hadn't seen him since the spring. Joseph pulled up at the fence. Morning, Nash, Joseph. Gideon stepped down into the yard. What brings you this far? Joseph climbed stiffly down, boots crunching frost. Heard word in town you'd taken in a woman and her 2 young uns. Thought I'd best come by with these. He reached into a satchel and drew out a folded set of documents tied with twine. Land transfer papers. Her husband's name was on a parcel near the Wind River Fork. The brothers tried to reclaim it, but the judge threw it out. Seems the deed passed to her proper. Delia appeared on the porch, shawl drawn close. How did it get settled? Joseph tipped his hat. Your preacher in Cody wrote a statement. Said you'd been forced off the land under threat, carried some weight. Gideon glanced at Delia, then stepped aside to let Joseph hand her the papers. Her fingers trembled as she untied the twine. She scanned the lines slowly. Joseph cleared his throat. There's a line in there that says you can sell or keep the property, but it's yours now. No one can contest it. Delia looked up. I don't want to sell it. You don't have to, Gideon said gently, but it's your choice now. She nodded once, clutching the papers to her chest. Joseph rubbed his hands together. I'll be moving on before the weather turns. Might not reach the basin before nightfall. Gideon led him around back, handed him a sack of dried meat, and sent him off with a pair of wool gloves Delia had finished the week before. When Gideon returned, Delia was still standing in the yard, the papers pressed against her ribs. I didn't think I'd ever see my name on anything again, she said. It's not just a name on paper, Gideon said. It's a life you made. She looked up at him. I don't want to go back to that land. Not even to claim it. There's too much grief in that soil, but I want to keep it. For Lily and Luke, he nodded. And I want to stay here, she added. Not just through the winter, I want to build something with you. Gideon took a step closer, his hand brushing hers. I've wanted that, quietly. Steadily, but I didn't want to ask until you were ready. I am. Her voice was sure. And I don't just mean for planting or mending or seeing the seasons through, I mean for you. He pulled her close, pressing his forehead gently to hers. Delia, I want all of it, the work, the worry. The light and the dark, with you. Inside, the fire crackled and the scent of cloves and cider filled the cabin. Lily's laughter rang out clear, and Luke's boots thudded across the floor as he chased her. The world outside the door was still and cold, but the heart of the home pulsed warm. They married 2 weeks later, just before the first heavy snow. Gideon carved 2 rings from ironwood and sanded them smooth as river stones. Delia wore hers on a ribbon around her neck, tucked beneath her collar. He wore his on a strip of leather at his wrist. They cleared the lean-to and rebuilt it into a second room. With space enough for the children and shelves, they filled with books, dried herbs, and the odds and ends of a life joined piece by piece. Lily took to drawing plants from the fields and pressing them between pages. Luke learned to snare rabbits and mend tack. Delia kept a ledger by the hearth where she tracked the days and the harvests. Gideon read aloud on Sundays, his voice steady, while Delia embroidered in the chair beside him, the children curled on the rug. The days turned as they always did, but no longer in silence. Their lives were stitched together with small things, shared bread, warm hands, the sound of Lily humming in the garden. There was no need to speak promises aloud. They were lived each day, in the way he waited for her to finish locking the pantry before turning in, or how she laid his coat across the bench on cold mornings so he wouldn't have to reach for it. And when the wind howled down from the ridge and the world outside vanished in white, the cabin stayed alight. A place not just of shelter, but of belonging. They loved each other without question, without hurry. Not with grand gestures, but with the kind of care that endures, and they never left. Together, they grew old beneath that sky, beneath those cottonwoods, on that land that held them both whole, safe, and home.